A University of Sydney professor and American sociologist, Professor Salvatore Babones, has exposed major shortcomings in Sweden's varieties of democracies or V-Dem ratings. Professor Babones, in a paper accessed exclusively by India Today, has not only decimated the latest V-Dem ratings of 2022 that placed the Indian democracy in the 100th position as against 65th in 2014. But he has also questioned the methodology adopted by the V-Dem Institute of Sweden. Professor Babones joins me on India Today for an India First special broadcast. But first, we bring you some of the bizarre findings of the report. Varieties of democracies rankings are flawed, asserts a Sydney University professor after a detailed analysis of the V-Dem 2022 report that claimed India had fallen to the 100th position as a democracy. Professor Salvatore Babones insists that there are very serious methodology flaws that lead to mischaracterization of democracies in this report.
Is what democracy really should be all about. Now, this report's being released March 1st as a launch report for the Indian Century Roundtable think tank. I hope you'll read it and take a look at it. It is a much more technical, statistical, methodological investigation of the most important of the three rankings, the V-Dem rankings. It's not all based on an analysis of the text involved in describing the rankings. It is an analysis of the rankings themselves and of the statistical methodology behind it.
The American sociologist working at the Sydney University carried out a detailed analysis of the Varieties of Democracies Report 2022 brought out by the V-Dem Institute in Sweden. The professor has faulted the report both on its objective and subjective sub-indices.
As a result of these methodological quirks, almost all of the analytical power, the discretionary power in the V-Dem rankings comes from two completely subjective sub-indices, that is from the freedom of association and freedom of expression sub-indices. Here there's a lot more room for interpretation. It seems to me highly unlikely that we can take these subjective measures at face value. The result of all of this is that India, in effect, gets no credit for having an objective democracy, that is a place where people can vote in genuine elections.
The V-Dem Electoral Democracy Index, published in March by Sweden's Varieties of Democracies Institute in its 2022 report, based on the data of 2021, saw India fall to the 100th position as against the 65th position in 2014. But Professor Babones argues that the report suffers from serious flaws, giving a perfect score on the sub-index of elected officials to countries like Libya, Cuba, Belarus, Russia, Syria and Vietnam. Among the 174 countries given a perfect score for universal suffrage, China, Hong Kong, Iran, North Korea, Myanmar, Palestine and Venezuela score higher than genuine democracies. Professor Babones says the methodology in these ratings is so flawed that according to these rankings, India's electoral system between 2019 and 21 was less free and fair compared to the height of emergency in 1976, when elections were suspended and more than 100,000 political opponents were imprisoned without trial. V-Dem ratings are unable to differentiate between real and sham democracies, he insists.
The V-Dem rankings, it turns out, have very serious methodological flaws that lead it to mischaracterize not only Indian democracy, but many democracies around the world. The V-Dem rankings include 5 sub-indices of electoral democracy that don't really differentiate in many cases between sham democracies or even complete non-democracies like China, North Korea, and Cuba, and genuine democracies like India.
The study has also questioned the subjective aspect of the ratings, where India is ranked 119th in the freedom of expression, thereby indicating censorship in India like in Iran. Bureau Report, India Today. And Professor Babones now joins me in our studio. Sir, welcome on India Today.
Pleasure to be here.
Before I come to the specific aspect of India, when we talk about this V-Dem report that gives a perfect score to countries like Belarus, Cuba, Libya and Syria on the issue of elected officials, what do you make of these findings?
134 countries in the world get a perfect score on the two objective sub-indices of the Rise of Democracy Institute rankings. These are elected officials and universal suffrage. Interestingly, India is not among the countries that gets a perfect objective score, because until recently, 2 members of the Lok Sabha were appointed to represent the Anglo-Indian community, meaning that India fell short of China on the metric of elected officials, because they're simply asking, do the constitutions say that everyone should be elected? They're not asking about the quality of those elections.
Bizarre. Then let me come to the second aspect. Among 174 countries, those given a perfect score for universal suffrage include countries like China, Hong Kong, after the Chinese takeover, Iran and North Korea. Why would anyone take the V-Dem ratings seriously?
Well, V-Dem actually says that they are not taking into account the quality of elections. They explicitly say sham democracies might be included among those rated as perfect democracies on these objective indicators. Now, they do differentiate between countries on the subjective indicators, but right off the bat, countries that are communist dictatorships, Vietnam, for example, starts out with a perfect score on 2 out of the 5 sub-indices, and that's what India's got to make up. That is, it has to make up with the quality of its democracy for the fact that Vietnam is beating India already when it comes to the 2 objective components of V-Dem.
And if we were to specifically talk about India now, on clean elections.
Yes.
India down to 91 in 2021 from 59 in 2014. This, when not even opposition in India questions the fairness of elections.
Oh, it's worse than that. India's 91. Hong Kong, occupied by China under the China security law, is rated 71 in the world. Hong Kong's elections are rated 20 ranks above India's for being free and fair elections. Now, that's not because of some subjective opinion. We talked last time about India's intellectuals. This isn't because of that. This is because of the very design of the rankings. When they define free and fair elections, they're asking questions like, is there vote buying? Is the voter registry complete? Is there violence at the polls? Are there polling irregularities? Now, in Hong Kong, they get a perfect score for all of these. Of course there are no irregularities at the polls. You can only vote for one person.
Yes.
So why would you have any violence at the polls when there's no opposition at the polls? So bizarrely, Hong Kong's elections are voted freer and fairer than India's by V-Dem, 20 ranks higher on free and fair elections, because they're not differentiating between these kind of sham elections with one candidate and an election that's truly competitive. In fact, in a country like India, where the elections are competitive, maybe at the margins there is a little bit of vote buying. I don't endorse that. V-Dem doesn't endorse that. No one endorses vote buying. But no one buys votes in Hong Kong because you have no choice who to vote for.
Yeah. Let me then come to one more aspect, and that is the issue of freedom of association. If we were to talk about freedom of association, India, as per these latest rankings of V-Dem, is ranked at 114 in 2021 in this report that came out in 2022, down from 92 in 2014. Does this, in your appreciation, Professor, reflect the bias of those who are writing this report, or is their methodology flawed?
Well, first of all, I'm suspicious of biases when Vietnam shows having higher freedom of association than India. When, again, it's a one-party communist dictatorship. But let's leave that aside and look at the methodology, because that's really what this report is about. When freedom of association is measured, we have multiple questions about, can NGOs operate in the country? There's only one question about, can you form a political party? Now, you think at the heart of democracy would be, can you have an opposition political party? But on the 5 major sub-indices of the V-Dem rankings, only one, freedom of association, concerns itself with can you form a political party. And even then, it's only one of the sub-indices of that, which means that can you form an NGO is actually more important for these rankings than can you have an opposition political party. On top of that, even on that one question, which should be central to democracy, can you oppose the government? Can you have an opposition political party? Even India doesn't get a perfect score there. Why? India bans the CPIM. So the fact that
CPIML.
yes, okay.
You're absolutely right.
So the fact that India bans a small number of terrorist-linked parties is equated with Vietnam and Hong Kong banning all opposition parties. They result in nearly the same points reduction for these two actions.
Which is one, disturbing. Two, if the methodology is flawed, the outcome would be flawed.
So this is by design. These are not problems of expert evaluations. These are not problems of interpretation. This is the design of the index. The index has very poor measurement qualities. Yes, it has a lot of questions that, if you look at them individually, seem to have to do with democracy. But when you add up the sum total, and you find out that the only real differentiation being made between a one-party communist dictatorship and a truly competitive electoral system, the only distinction being made is on one question on one sub-index. And even there, the fact that certain political parties are banned is equated with you cannot have any opposition whatsoever. That shows that by design, V-Dem is significantly flawed. And that's not only flawed for India. I wouldn't take any of the ratings in V-Dem seriously. I mean, I'm American. My own country is rated below Argentina for the quality of its democracy. Now, I don't take that very seriously. But nonetheless, that's the result of the idiosyncratic measurement choices being made by the designers of this index.
You know, so maybe in America can get away because of its economic power, its political power. Maybe they can get away and say that we don't take these ratings seriously. But for an emerging economy, of course the world's 5th largest economy, India, can these ratings be damaging?
It's a serious problem because the rest of the world only knows about India what they hear from the likes of V-Dem. The rest of the world doesn't have strong knowledge of what's actually happening in India. If you hear from V-Dem that Indian democracy has fallen to the level of Hong Kong or Vietnam, why should you doubt that if you're somewhere in the rest of the world? On top of that, because V-Dem is so methodologically sophisticated, highly flawed, but very sophisticated, it's embedded in all sorts of other rankings. The Cato Institute rankings use it. U.S. Agency for International Development uses it. The World Bank uses it. That is, when other people are looking for an authoritative gauge of a country's institutions, they go to V-Dem.
In fact, that's the point I was coming to. But let's for a moment talk about freedom of expression. India has a huge media footprint. We have a very large number of television channels, and across the country, multiple states, large TV, radio, newspapers, digital, online, social media, broadcasting across the country and to the world. Media is vibrant, vocal opposition, assertive judiciary. What, in your view, then, would explain India at 119 in 2021 against 61 in 2014?
Well, and currently rated on a par with Iran for media freedom, which of course is bizarre. But this is a result of the problems we already knew about V-Dem, that its subjective components, the 2/3 of V-Dem that's subjective, that is all based on expert evaluations. And so India's own intellectuals are rating India, India's own journalists are rating India as having the press freedom of a country like Iran. That subjectivity is baked in. This new paper, though, is really all about the fact that even if we give that, even if we accept that there are problems with this subjectivity, even the objective components of V-Dem are so badly designed that they don't differentiate between a vibrant democracy and a one-party communist dictatorship.
And that should be alarming because ratings like V-Dem, as you point out, it fails to differentiate between a real democracy and a sham democracy. But I want to come back to that question. Would this not adversely impact India's standing and ratings globally?
So first, that word sham democracy is not just my word, it's their word. I mean, I can read from them that on one-fifth of the ranking, our officials elected, quote, a popular election is minimally defined and also includes sham elections with limited suffrage or no competition. This is baked right into the rankings. Now, of course, when other people use these rankings, they don't question the methodology. Look, even I didn't question the methodology, and this is my own area of academic expertise, is international rankings. I had taken this at face value until I started unpacking and trying to ask, why did India score so low on these rankings? Not just attributing it to the answers intellectuals gave, but asking, what are the nuts and bolts of it? Even I hadn't looked into it. So the idea that other people would look into it, that journalists, that fund managers, that people use these rankings as governance indicators, that the idea that they would somehow read the whole report and come to their own conclusion is ridiculous. Of course, they read the overall press release. They get the number at the top line number. The top line number is number 100 in the world, and they discount India's democracy on account. And that's not 100th among democracy. I mean, that's 100th total. Remember, most countries in the world today don't even have real elections. India ranks worse than places like Ivory Coast, which are one-party dictatorships where the opposition leaders have been sent into exile. I mean, it's really incredible. But it rates worse because the problems with measurement are baked right into the methodology. It's not just about it's not just about India's experts giving India low scores. It's that too, but it's also fundamental flaws in the methodology.
And in your view, so, we've spoken about the objective part where you've questioned the methodology, but on the subjective part, where personal biases or influences or what's written perhaps in op-eds, not just in India but also overseas, does that impact the overall ratings of a country, outlook towards a country, and should that not be corrected?
So absolutely that's a problem. Of the 5 major components of V-Dem, 2 are purely objective, 1 is kind of a mix, and 2 are purely subjective. Now, on the objective ones, like I said, we had this problem that India is rated the same or even slightly lower than one-party dictatorships like Vietnam and China. On the mixed ones, we have the problem that, again, they don't properly differentiate between truly free elections and single-party elections. Now, at the heart of democracy is competition. There's nothing, and I emphasize this, nothing in the V-Dem rankings that actually measures the degree of competition and the degree of choice that voters have. On the subjective side, of course, India gets savaged. And that's where I've said before that it's India's intellectuals who are responsible for the anti-India bent of these rankings, because they're the ones savaging India on the subjective components. But I want to stress, even if they didn't, even if they all reversed their opinion, even if India's intellectuals decided tomorrow that the Electoral Commission of India truly is independent and has not become beholden to the government, even if they reverse course, India's still all going to be stuck with a ranking among the worst among actual democracies in the world, because the objective components are baked in.
Then it would bring into question these rating agencies, and not just V-Dem, the others. How seriously should they actually be taken, or can they also then be used as instruments of foreign policy to browbeat or coerce a nation?
Ironically, it's V-Dem that is the best of the indices that rates India the worst. The Economist Intelligence Unit, which seemingly just picks a number out of thin air and gives a country a rating, actually rates India much higher. And I think because they're aware that there is real democracy in India, and they're making a purely subjective expert evaluation. It's when we get to these objective but very badly designed indicators, V-Dem is the key example of that. The Freedom House indices are also objective but questionably designed. They give a false sense of certainty. They give the idea that, look, on this mostly objective, highly methodologically sophisticated set of indices, the creator of V-Dem went in an interview and said that V-Dem was based on astronomer math, extraordinarily sophisticated mathematics. It's because of the high level of sophistication that people tend to trust V-Dem, that people tend to trust Freedom House. And that trust is misplaced, because even though it may be very sophisticated, It is extraordinarily badly designed. And I say that as someone whose profession is studying international indicators.
Exactly. So, and that's a big point that you're making here on India Today, that the trust in V-Dem is actually wrongly placed, or it's misplaced.
Well, the trust in a way is rightly placed in that this is an independent academic organization with independent grant funding from the European Research Council. This should be a first-rate ranking. The methodology is very sophisticated. They've simply messed up. They've just got it wrong. And take it from me, I always remind people I am not an India expert. I'm a rankings expert. I've come to India because I've seen it misplaced on the rankings, not because I have such deep knowledge of India. This ranking methodology is screwy. It's not designed to harm India. I really have to stress that. It is just very badly designed. And as a result, it does not differentiate. And they even admit they don't differentiate on certain subcomponents between genuinely competitive elections and sham elections in which one party is the only choice.
Okay, which brings me to the point, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, this is India's year of G20 presidency. The Prime Minister says, we are the mother of democracies. Now, and we are, I mean, given India's history, given India's past record, the fact that we've had free and fair elections, this report, the 2021 report, and the elections that have happened in 2019 and so on, would give the emergency in India higher ratings than 2019.
Well, again, if you believe that the Electoral Commission of India was more independent during the emergency, and if you believe that the opposition in India today is more severely restrained than during the emergency, well, then you can trust these rankings. On the other hand, if you think that the emergency was a unique event in Indian history, never to be repeated, then I think you have to take the subjective component of these rankings with a grain of salt. But again, what's new in this research, we've known since August, we've known since my interview in India Today in November, that the subjective components were flawed because the subjective components were based on individual people's opinions that really couldn't be trusted. What is new in this paper is the analysis that the objective components, the things that we should be able to trust, we should be able to say we don't have to worry at least about the objective components, they can't be influenced. Those are just so badly designed. They're not designed to harm India intentionally. They're just so badly designed that India, which has real elections, gets a lower score on the two objective components than Vietnam, which is a one-party communist dictatorship, lower than Cuba, lower than the Palestinian Authority, which hasn't had an election in 30 years. India ranks lower on the objective components. And that's what's really new here, is the discovery that it's not just all about India's intellectuals giving India a bad rating. It's about the rankings themselves being so badly designed that India can't get a break.
In India's G20 presidency year, a report like this, does that damage India, or does that actually damage the institute and its flawed methodology?
I think there's serious problems with the methodology, and I've come to believe now that they're so serious that V-Dem really has to start over. Now, it doesn't have to start over because India got a low ranking. Lots of countries are unhappy with their rankings. They need to start over because the methodology is so seriously flawed that we really can't take any of their rankings seriously, not just for India, but really almost for any country in the world. I mean, the idea that Hong Kong is something like 70th in the world for free and fair elections and much better than a country like India, it's just shocking. And that's not the result of an expert evaluation. That's the result of the perverse methodology embedded in the rankings.
Now, when you look at these rankings, and you've also traveled through parts of India, what's your appreciation of the country vis-a-vis the rankings?
India, of course, is a highly successful democracy. I always call it the world's most extraordinarily successful democracy. Extraordinarily successful because it's cracked the code of how to run a democracy on a GDP per capita of less than $2,500 a year. No other country in the world has managed that. To find another country that's a democracy that has even 3 decades of free and fair elections, you have to look at countries that are 3 times as rich as India. So this is a real opportunity for India to do democracy education around the world. If someone is going to be the Vishwa Guru of democracy, it's not going to be the United States. We've seen that disaster in Iraq and Afghanistan and so many places. It's India that seems to have solved the question, how do you run a democracy in a poor country? And I'd love to see India giving technical advice to the world, not just on earthquakes, not just on development, but actually helping them learn how to run a democracy on a budget. That's what India does that no other country has managed to do.
I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. Truly, India, according to Professor Babones, truly the Vishwa Guru of democracies, and there are lessons that the world can learn from India junking such ratings. That is all I have time for on India First this evening. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.